So I just finished up backpacking through Mexico by myself for the last 4 months, and I decided to do a little Q&A because there are so many things that I had to learn about on the fly while I was in Mexico, and I wanted to clear up quite a few things in this video. If you're curious about traveling to Mexico, whether it's by yourself or with a group, whether you're going on vacation or you travel full-time like me. So if you want some of your questions answered about all of that, then keep on watching. So I put a poll up on my, or a question sticker up on my Instagram to see what your guys' most burning questions were. Of course, you pulled through as always. So I'm gonna go through some of the most frequently asked questions. The first one being, what was my route? I figured this was a good question to start off with. So I flew direct from Orlando to Guadalajara. I was there for 8 days, and then I took a bus from Guadalajara to Sayulita, spent 2 weeks in Sayulita, and then I took a flight from Puerto Vallarta, which is you can either take a bus from Sayulita to the Puerto Vallarta airport. It's about 50 minutes. That bus ride is super easy. It was, I think, 40 or 50 pesos, or you can take a cab for 700, 800 pesos. Either way, I flew out of the Puerto Vallarta airport to Puerto Escondido. I had to connect through Mexico City, and I stayed in Puerto Escondido for 5 weeks. From there, I took an overnight bus from Puerto Escondido to Oaxaca City, and then I stayed in Oaxaca City for 3 weeks, and then I took another overnight bus from Oaxaca City to San Cristobal de las Casas, stayed there for 2 weeks, and then I took a flight out of Tuxtla to Puerto Vallarta and basically went back to Sayulita for another 3 weeks. So that was my route. If you want to see all of the videos from that route, you can click the link in the description box. Basically, my entire Mexico series is linked there. So make sure if you haven't seen all those videos, you can go check those out. Another question I get all the time is, how did I decide where to go? And typically it's a combination of a few things. The first being, I do some research before I go to Mexico or go to a country at all. I look at blogs, I look at YouTube videos, I look on social media. Typically, if I'm wanting to go to a country, I already have a few things pinned on my Google Maps. My Google Maps is insane. I have like 18 million pins. And yeah, from there, I just kind of try and find locations to base myself that have a good digital nomad or backpacker community. Especially while traveling solo, this is really important for me to know that I'm gonna be around other travelers that I can go on adventures with and connect with and all of those types of things. That's one of my favorite parts about this lifestyle. And then once I'm on the ground, I just ask around. So I try to keep my route a little bit open-ended, not plan too far ahead. I am such a planner by nature, but I try to kind of go somewhere in the middle, because once you're in a country and you start meeting other backpackers and other travelers, you start to hear about all these other places that maybe you've never heard of before, that other people that you've met are like, you have to go here, or a group of us are going here in a few weeks, you should totally join, and you kind of want to have that flexibility. So that's typically how I do that. I also got a few questions about burnout and how I avoid burning out while traveling full-time, and this is something that has become more and more important to me as I continue to do this. You know, traveling full-time brings me so much joy and so much fulfillment, but I learned very quickly that no matter where you are in the world, what your lifestyle is, you can't escape your own mind. I've dealt with anxiety and depression my entire life, and that doesn't just switch off the second you start living out your dreams, despite what you may think. I used to think it as well, but I have to continue to prioritize my mental health every single day in order to continue to travel and live out my dreams. Otherwise, none of this would be possible. As many of you know, I did go through a breakup on this Mexico trip, and breakups in and of itself suck, no matter what. But I was also traveling alone. I'm in a very volatile environment, and I really struggled with this. And honestly, the number one thing that has kept me afloat during this difficult time has been therapy, which is why I am so excited to thank the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of more than 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, you just need to answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone call, or video. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions whenever it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional cost. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality that you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom picked for you, more scheduling flexibility, and at a more affordable price. You can get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/Crosby, and I've also linked this down below in the description. The next question is, do you feel that staying in a private room was worth it, I guess, in comparison to a dorm room? Just for context, I almost always stay in co-living spaces or hostels that are geared towards remote workers. Usually these places have a co-work space. Most of the people staying there work online, so it's a great environment for someone like me that doesn't necessarily want to be in the full backpacker party every day vibe, but I still want to have a community of people and I still want to be able to work online and be productive. I stayed in a combination of dorm rooms and private rooms during my time in Mexico. For me, I actually found that staying in a private room was really helpful specifically for my job. So obviously a huge part of my job is to film YouTube videos, and it can be difficult to film a lot when I'm staying in a dorm because there's not a lot of private areas where I can kind of sit down and talk to you guys like I am right now. So when I was staying in private rooms, I actually found that I was a lot more productive. I found it a lot easier to create the videos that I wanted to create. I didn't have to like go find a hidden corner in the backyard or on the roof or something to film, and I didn't feel like I was in people's space filming. So that's just a personal thing for me, but I honestly don't mind staying in dorms at all. It's such a great way to travel on a budget. Haven't had any bad experiences aside from my literal first time ever staying in a dorm in Lagos, Portugal. That was back in like 2018. I didn't do any research at all. It was a huge party hostel and it was like a co-ed dorm, and there were people like having sex above me, and like it was a whole thing. But that was the only time that I was just kind of like, is this hostel life? But after that, I've done a lot more research. I always look at the photos. I make sure that there's a privacy curtain. If there's not, it's not a huge deal breaker, but I do really like to have a privacy curtain. The biggest thing I often find is cleanliness and partying are like the two main things that can be an issue with dorms. So if you check the reviews and kind of see what people are saying, you can get a really good idea of what the vibe is like in the dorms there. But yeah, I really like to do both, and it just kind of depends on my budget, I guess. Okay, so let's get into some of the travel tips. So one of the questions, I have them written down on my computer, was where was the best food in Mexico that I found? For me personally, there were two places that really stood out to me for the food. The first one was Oaxaca City. This is no secret to any foodies out there. Oaxaca City is super famous, super world-renowned for its incredible regional cuisine. So if you're trying to have some amazing Mexican, Oaxacan food, Oaxaca City is the spot, for sure. But the other place that surprised me was San Cristobal. Prior to coming to San Cris, I was in the state of Oaxaca for almost, actually 2 months exactly. So I was very definitely not sick of Oaxacan food, but I was kind of craving a little switch up. And San Cris has a huge variety of international cuisine, which I was not expecting, but I had some of the best ramen, the best Chinese food. They have a lot of Asian food I found, and then they also have a ton of vegan and vegetarian options. I'm pescatarian, but I primarily eat veggie, so this was really great. So yeah, San Cris is definitely a hidden gem for some international cuisine if you want to sort of switch it up from the traditional Mexican food. The next question was tips for traveling between cities, transportation, all of that. Buses are definitely, for me and for a lot of other backpackers, are the #1 way to travel around Mexico. They're cheap, they're safe, they're reliable. I'd say like the only thing I've noticed is that sometimes you'll arrive a little bit later to a destination than is what is estimated. But yeah, I took buses all over Mexico. Like I mentioned in my route, I was taking them from Guadalajara to Sayulita. I took 2 different night buses. Night buses are super popular for budget travelers. They're usually, for like a 12, 13-hour ride, are $50-ish US dollars. I mean, they're not the most comfortable thing that you'll sleep in, but if you're trying to save some money, it's a great way to do that. But yeah, you're not getting like a full lay down seat, at least in the ones I took. I'd say one thing to note with the night buses is you may get pulled over. When I came from Puerto Escondido to Oaxaca City, we got pulled over, I wanna say like 3 times throughout the night by military checkpoints. This is super standard, it happens all the time. They're typically coming on and doing security checks, so like randomly check people's passport or visa, or have dogs come and sniff the bags for drugs or anything like that. So yeah, I woke up a few times and there was like military people on the bus. That's the only thing to just be aware of, but it was totally fine. But if you do have the extra money and you want to save some time, then most places that you'll be traveling to have some kind of regional airport that, you know, you can take a flight to another place and definitely saves you a lot of time, but it may be a bit more expensive, or will be a lot more expensive, but just depends on your budget. The next question is, what's one off the beaten path destination that you recommend? I'm gonna give you two because I love you so much. The first place is Chomula, which is in Chiapas. It's about a 2-hour bus ride from San Cristobal, and this is home to basically my favorite adventure pretty much of my entire trip in Mexico. The water is so blue. There's so many waterfalls. Oh my God. I highly recommend basing yourself in Chomula for the weekend and renting a car and going and exploring some of the off the beaten path waterfalls that are in that area. It's such an insane place. We went to Las Nubes, we went to Sacchen. I think the coolest part about this whole place is how untouched and undiscovered it is. Literally the only people at this place and the last waterfall are all locals. And of course the famous El Chiflon. You can get to El Chiflon from San Cris, but if you stay in Chomula and you have a car, you can get there early and avoid all of the crowds. So we had the waterfalls all to ourselves. It was absolutely amazing. And by the time 11 a.m. rolled around, there were crowds all over the place. So definitely worth that, you know, basing yourself in Chomula. My life is not real. And then the second place I definitely recommend as kind of an off the beaten path weekend trip is Chacagua, also known as Lagunas de Chacagua National Park. This is right outside of Puerto Escondido, and it has some of the best surfing in all of Mexico. To get here, you will either take a taxi or a colectivo to a little town. I'll put the name right here. And then from there, you'll take a boat to Chacagua. It's such a beautiful boat ride. You go through all of these mangroves, and it's just really beautiful. It's a national park, obviously, so the nature is incredible. And then you get there and you'll stay in one of the little cabañas on the beach. They're super basic, they're really cheap, and you can actually camp there if you want to save some extra money. But we stayed at Tierra Tipi, which is fantastic. The people there are so sweet, the food is amazing, and yeah, you're right on the beach. It's just so incredible. Highly recommend going there for the weekend, especially if you love surfing, but I don't really surf that much and I still had such a wonderful time. So yeah, that's a really great spot to go if you're craving a little change up from Puerto Escondido. The next question is one of my most frequently asked questions, and that is, what are your tips to stay safe? Are there any precautions that I take before I go on a solo trip like this? I have lots to say about this. The most important thing that you need to do before you go anywhere, Mexico or any other country, is to do your research beforehand. What I do is I will go to the US State Department's website and I will go and research basically every country I'm going to. In Mexico specifically, they actually break it up by state, which is really smart because it's really hard to generalize Mexico. It's such a big country. Every state is totally different. There's different things going on in every state and every part of Mexico. So you obviously don't want to go anywhere that's ranked do not travel. That's the level 4. Pretty much every story that you see on the news, any of those horror stories that happen in Mexico, pretty much all of them happen in these do not travel states. So just don't go there, and you will not be putting yourself in a situation that you don't want to be in, most likely. So that's the number one thing that you need to do before you go to Mexico. The second thing that I do that is an extra layer because I travel solo is I enroll myself in the STEP program, which stands for Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. This is a really cool program for US citizens. If you're not a US citizen, maybe see if your country has something similar. You basically can register your route with the nearest US embassy or consulate wherever you're going. So I'll go in there and I will put in my tentative dates and destinations of where I'm planning on being. So that way, if for some reason I evaporate off the face of the earth, they kind of know where I was planning to be. Once you put your route into that program, you'll get email alerts if anything is happening in that region, in that state or country. It's a really great resource. I definitely recommend it. And then some other general tips. This really applies to any country you're going to, but I'll say it anyways. The number one thing that I hear about happening with travelers is when they're drunk and walking around alone at night. That's the number one way to get mugged. So just don't do that, people. Pretty much every time I've heard of someone getting mugged or jumped or robbed or anything like that, it's happened late in the night, they're by themselves, and usually they're kind of drunk. Second thing I always do is asking locals or people that have been in the area for a really long time what areas of the city I should avoid, which ones are good to walk around in. So yeah, just ask around, get the lay of the land from the local. Don't be flashy, don't carry a lot of valuables on you. You know, in the States, having an iPhone is really normal and you wouldn't really think that that's necessarily being flashy, but it is in a lot of other countries. So you just don't want to, yeah, just be super obviously holding your phone, being a tourist, and even things as simple as like wearing gold jewelry. You just kind of want to be cautious of the image you're putting out into the world. Another thing that really helps me is knowing some Spanish. You don't need to be fluent, but it does really help if you know some basic phrases. The more you know, the less likely locals are going to take advantage of you, especially even when it comes to like haggling, getting a cab. If you know Spanish, they will be less likely to totally rip you off. So it's another tip. And then lastly, always share your location or your plans with people, whether that's someone back in the States, like your parents or a loved one or a friend back at your hostel. If you're going somewhere by yourself or even with a group, you just kind of want to tell people what your plans are in case something happens. So yeah, definitely do that. The next question is, what do you do for cell Wi-Fi coverage? For me personally, actually, Mexico is really convenient. I have an unlimited Verizon cell phone plan, which covers roaming data in Mexico and Canada. So I really don't have to do anything, which is lovely. But if you don't have that, I believe Telcel is the best local SIM card that you can get, and you just kind of load data on there as you need it. And then in terms of Wi-Fi, when I'm working on my laptop, I pretty much rely on Wi-Fi the entire time. So a big priority for me is staying places that have really strong Wi-Fi, good places to work, which is why I always gravitate towards co-livings. My favorite ones in Mexico were definitely Co 404 co-living, Casa Flow in Puerto Escondido, and La Valley co-living in Guadalajara. If you want some more spots all over the world that I've worked at and really recommend for digital nomads, I actually have a curated list called the Nomad Map. It's linked down in the description if you want to check that out. But yeah, I always just basically have to do my research beforehand and make sure that there is either really strong Wi-Fi and a good place to work at my accommodation, or I will find a nearby co-work space that has good reviews that I can go to and work at. Okay, I love this question. How often do you feel like you need to be alone or away from people while traveling? Tips for taking time for yourself while traveling long term. This is actually the longest trip I've ever taken by myself, and one of the biggest things I learned is that I'm definitely pretty introverted, despite what it may seem on YouTube. I'm very outgoing, but I need time by myself to recharge. So this was something that I definitely did not do for the first couple months, and by like month 3, I was just like, oh my God, I'm so tired. And I kept getting sick and there was all these things. So I really realized that I needed to be taking more time for myself, prioritizing time alone, resting, all of these types of things. Because when you're staying in shared living spaces, you're socializing so much more than you would be if you're staying at like an Airbnb or living in an apartment. So you definitely need to prioritize those introverted moments, whether that is getting your own private room at a hostel or getting an Airbnb for the weekend. You just kind of have to take inventory of what you need and what your, ideal level of socialization is. But yeah, it really comes down to personal preference and kind of what you need. Another question is, do you have a base somewhere to call home while you travel? I get this question a lot. I am currently in Tampa, Florida. This is my hometown. But no, I do not have a home base as in like my own place that I keep all my stuff. I pretty much have, number one, done a ton of just downsizing. Once you start traveling a lot, you realize you just do not need as many things as you think you do. So I've done a lot of selling a lot of my clothes, giving stuff away, and I pretty much just keep all of my stuff in boxes. My parents have a huge storage area in their house, which is really great. If that wasn't an option, I would just put it in storage. I've thought about like getting a place, but financially that just doesn't really make sense for me right now. But I would say if you have an apartment that you really love and maybe you only want to travel like 6 months out of the year, then rent it out, Like I know a lot of people that travel like a good amount, like maybe 4 to 6 months out of the year or a little bit more, and they will just put their apartment out for short-term rentals. And that way you're, either making money or at least covering your rent. And then you have somewhere to come back to after your travels to kind of reset and chill out a little bit. But for me personally, that's just not where I'm at yet. I got this question a lot, which I was surprised about, and that's, would you consider moving to Mexico full time? Short answer is yes, absolutely. I love Mexico so much. It is super convenient for me work-wise. It's, on a similar time zone to the States, and it's a quick flight from Florida where all my friends and family live. So that's super convenient. Obviously, I just love Mexico so much. And one thing I realized from being there for 4 months is that I barely scratched the surface, and there's so many other places in Mexico that I want to see and explore. I'm not quite ready to move anywhere full-time quite yet, but I really love Puerto Escondido so much. been there twice now, and I would totally go back. I also really loved Oaxaca City, but there's so many other places in Mexico I have yet to explore, Mexico City being one of them. I do really want to go back there early next year, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, I really loved Mexico. I met so many great people there. Yeah, I think I just need to kind of find like the right place where I would want to kind of settle for a little bit. But again, it's really hard for me to do that right now. I'm very restless, and I'm sure at some point I'll be exhausted to the point where I do want to kind of have my own place, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Another question I got is, when are you going back to Mexico? I already booked my place. I'm so pumped. I'm going back to Mexico for Dia de los Muertos, which has been on my bucket list for so long, and I'm so pumped. I'm actually gonna be there for my birthday, which is super exciting, and a bunch of my friends that I met in Oaxaca are also going. So yeah, that is this October into November when I'm gonna be there, and I'm so excited. So stay tuned for that, because that's gonna be epic. And then the last question, I thought I would wrap things up with this question, was what have I learned over the last 4 months? What are my main takeaways? There are quite a few things that I learned about the country of Mexico, but really about myself. That's why I love traveling like this so much, is because it's such a accelerator for personal growth and understanding yourself and gaining confidence and all these things. A few things that I learned about myself on this trip is, number one, that solo travel is just so amazing and I love it so much. Like I mentioned, this is my longest solo travel trip to date. I think my longest one before that was like 2 or 3 weeks. So yeah, this was huge. Yeah, I really learned that I absolutely love it. To me, it is the type of travel that opens up the most doors and opportunities than if I were to be traveling with a group or with a partner. I'm meeting a lot more people. I'm able to be a lot more flexible. I don't have to ask anyone if they're okay with a certain plan. I can just literally do whatever I want. Like I mentioned before, I've also learned that I need to just chill out. It's really not in my nature to slow down, practice self-care, especially when traveling, because obviously the whole time I'm in these places that people go on vacation, so there's so much to do all the time. And so I really have to not only prioritize work, which is not an issue for me. I actually have to tone down my workaholic tendencies. So typically what I tend to do is work so much during the week, and then any free time that I have, I'm exploring. I'm going on an adventure, I'm walking around the city, I'm meeting new people, but there has to be also time that I make for myself to just chill out, have an introverted moment, because otherwise my brain just never turns off and it's exhausting. And like I said, I kept getting sick. I was sick at least every month with some ailment. It was so annoying. And yeah, it was just because my body was just telling me to slow down and I was not listening to it. So that is a huge thing that I've learned. And then the last thing, I talked about this in my Sayulita video and in my Oaxaca video, but I learned how challenging it can be to travel long term because you are meeting so many amazing people from all over the world. I've made some of my deepest connections ever on this past trip, but then you're saying goodbye to these people. And some of them, you may make plans to see them again, but other people, it's kind of up in the air. Yeah, it really got to me after like month 3 of being in Mexico. I was just like, oh my God, I'm so tired of saying goodbye to people all the time. So that's just something to be aware of, something that I guess I sort of thought of in theory because it kind of makes sense, but once you're in it, it's like, it is really exhausting. And then, of course, like I mentioned, when it comes to Mexico specifically, I just really learned after 4 months that it's such a diverse, huge country. And yeah, I was there for, I guess, sort of a long time, but it really felt like I barely scratched the surface. So like I said, I already have plans to go back to see more of the country. Yeah, there's all these places inland that I really want to check out as well. Yeah, stay tuned. I'm definitely not done with Mexico, but I am super excited to go to Indonesia next. So yeah, make sure you're subscribed to follow along on those adventures. And if you are new here and you haven't watched my Mexico series yet, I have it linked down in the description, like I mentioned. But that's about it. I'm gonna wrap this Q&A up here. Thank you guys so much again for supporting me. And yeah, if you enjoyed this, if this was valuable to you, please give it a like and make sure to subscribe. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one in Bali. Bye.